Hello and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Elloian. Our show topic today is Roundup. Is it ready for another trial? Our guest is Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She is a senior research scientist at MIT. Her research includes analysis of empirical data from government, public and private resources, including chemical, molecular, and atomic properties to assess the potential for synergistic effect upon human health. Let's welcome Dr. Stephanie Seneff. Welcome, Dr. Seneff.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, there's been a number of jury awards, and 3 have actually put a verdict in on behalf of the plaintiff.
Right.
One for $2 billion.
That's so incredible. I was so thrilled when I saw that. It's really unbelievable.
It is.
Very exciting.
It is. So what is this telling us? I mean, what are these juries hearing and seeing to make them want to award these injured plaintiffs so high
it's a very good
damage?
point. And what I think is happening is it's just like the cigarette industry all over again. And all of this stuff is coming out from information from email exchanges and whatnot of all of this behavior on the part of Monsanto to try to prevent people from finding out how toxic glyphosate is. You know, and things like having Monsanto people write papers and then having someone ghostwritten basically for someone who is prestigious in the community to have them put their name on the paper by, if you pay them enough money, they'll do that, this kind of thing.
Now, first of all, Roundup is the product that's being sold.
Yes.
It's a weed killer.
Yes.
And it's been marketed as harmless to
Right.
humans and the environment.
Absolutely.
But juries are finding and people
It's
are
not.
finding that it's not.
Right. I mean, this is what's happening. And I mean, it's really fortunate that, in a way, that people are using it in their yards, because these people that are coming up now, with the farmers, there's clear damage, but they get exposed to so many chemicals that you can always put the blame on something else. Whereas with these random individuals who are simply using Roundup on their yards, they're not using anything else. And so therefore, there's a very clear case to say it's the Roundup that caused their problems. And when you see this consistent pattern of heavy use of Roundup on your own property, followed by non-Hodgkins lymphoma, that's the pattern we're seeing. 13,000 cases people have claimed that Roundup is causing their non-Hodgkins lymphoma. It's amazing.
In that Pilliard case, both husband and wife.
Yes, the two of them were, and people didn't realize, because they say it's so safe, so people don't know they have to be careful.
And in fact, in reading some of the documents, it's the failure to warn
Yes.
is the way that this product liability claim has been moving forward. It's failure to
Absolutely, I
warn.
think that's right. And it's again, deception on the part of Monsanto as far as what's been found about glyphosate. They know it's much more toxic than they're claiming that it is. The Monsanto people know that.
Right, and it's come out in Discovery, too.
Yes.
And the papers, tell us a little bit about what you've read in some of the papers.
Well, there's just an enormous number of papers. I've been collecting huge piles of papers on glyphosate. It's a fascinating molecule. I'm so intrigued by it because I believe it has a unique mechanism of toxicity, which is why it causes so many diseases. It's not just non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's a huge list. And we see all these diseases going up
Fatty
dramatically.
liver disease.
Fatty liver disease, absolutely. And there was a recent study that came out, very low doses, like environmentally acceptable doses of glyphosate exposure to rats induce fatty liver disease. So it's harmful at very small doses. And I believe it's the main cause of the autism epidemic that we're facing today. And I think it's causing, as I said, a huge list of diseases, many different cancers. There's bladder cancer, kidney cancer, liver cancer, breast cancer, various pancreatic cancer, thyroid cancer. These are all going up dramatically, in step with the dramatic rise in glyphosate usage.
Now, when they apply this, Roundup is, the main ingredient is glyphosate, and they mix other chemicals and
Right,
surfactants.
they put in surfactants and other things that are increasing the toxicity. Both they are toxic in and of themselves, and they increase the permeability of glyphosate through the cell wall, which makes it get into the cells and cause a lot of trouble.
So it gets absorbed into the body, especially...
And it gets past the skin barrier, for example, because of the surfactants.
Right, especially in these folks that aren't informed.
Yes.
The duty to warn, which obviously didn't happen.
Right.
And they're wearing T-shirts and flip-flops. I've read through
Right.
some of the legal
just completely
filings.
unaware, because we're being misled into thinking it's supposed to be this perfect herbicide because it kills all plants, which is also pretty scary, the fact that it kills all plants. Most herbicides are selective. and then it's completely harmless to humans. I mean, it's a little bit fishy to think that something's going to be that toxic to plants and not affect us as well. So you should be suspicious, but people have learned that, you know, I can go down to the local hardware store, I can buy it, I can spray it in front of my children. Nobody's going to stop me from doing that. I mean, it's just this notion that it's safe.
And of course,
it's really scary.
And of course, pets now have more cancers now
because huge number of issues,
especially when they're on the grass, when they're
absolutely, yes, and they're getting kidney problems as well. I mean, I had a dog who died of kidney failure, and I suspect now that glyphosate was a factor there, looking back.
And it's in our water.
It's in our water.
It's in our food.
It's all over the food supply, and this is something very disturbing to me as well. And in fact, the government has been extremely lax on testing our food for glyphosate, which I really fault them on that. They claim that, I don't know, it's not, you don't need to test because it's not toxic. I mean, this is the kind of twisted logic.
But mothers across America, haven't they been testing the food?
They've been fantastic. They've been finding it in food. They found it in, they tested all kinds of wines from California. They found it in all of them, including organics, much less in the organics, but still present.
Because of the drift.
Yeah, it's just, you can't avoid it. You don't use, if it's organic, they cannot use glyphosate. That's against the laws for organic, so that's good to know. So buy organic, that's a good message. But it's still there because it's in the rain, it's probably in the manure. I mean, you know, you can't avoid it.
It's permeated our environment. So the EPA says it's okay, though.
Right?
US EPA.
Yeah, they think it's great.
And what do you think? What is your understanding of why do they think?
I'm sure they've been paid to say that. I mean, basically, the industry knows how to control the regulatory agencies. At this point, I think the EPA is a joke. I don't have any faith in them to protect us, and we need to learn that. The individual in the population needs to recognize the fact that the government is not looking out for your health, and you need to take matters into your own hands. You need to be aware, and then you need to be careful. Buying organic food, when you cook whole foods organically grown for your family, and your children will be much healthier because of it.
And what about the water, though? What do you do about the water?
The water, that's an issue too, and there's ways you can remove the glyphosate from the water. It's actually hard to remove because it's a very tiny molecule. You can't just filter it out with these things that just absorb. That won't work. But reverse osmosis filter can remove the glyphosate.
Is that right? And
fortunately, in the water treatment plants, they usually use some form of chlorine, like chlorine dioxide or chlorine like bleach, to kill microbes in the water. And the researchers have shown that chlorine dioxide can break down glyphosate.
Really?
Non-enzymatically, which is really, really super, because I think because they use chlorine in the water supply, I think they're doing a good job of removing a lot of the glyphosate that's there. That's really fortunate. They don't realize that they're doing that, but they are.
But chlorine dioxide, that's different than the chlorine that's in a swimming pool. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, there's various forms of chlorine. Of course, sodium chloride is chlorine, right? That's salt, so that's very safe. Chlorine gas is extremely toxic. So there's sort of all these different versions of chlorine that have different degrees of toxicity.
I see.
And bleach, is based on chlorine. And so chlorine is often used as to wipe out microbes, to try to keep the food safe and things like that. So, but in the form of things like chlorine dioxide.
Yeah. Just to recap a little bit, our EPA is not doing anything about this.
Yes.
But the World Health Organization, I think it's the IARC, they have actually said that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic.
That's
and they
right.
did that a few years
2015, April, I think it was April 2015. That was really, really a great thing that happened. And I think that gave momentum for these lawsuits to come forward as well. Very, very important. And of course, they got huge pushback from Monsanto. Monsanto spent a huge amount of money actually fighting them to try to discredit them and to get rid of that, And of course, they got the regulators both in Europe and the United States to say, oh, no, it's not carcinogenic.
Yeah. From what I understand, Monsanto, which is now Bayer, had actually scientists ghostwrite some of these documents that said it's not carcinogenic.
Absolutely. They are very, they prepared these documents that sort of whitewash, make glyphosate look really, really safe. And then they got certain leaders in the field to be willing to put their name on the paper for a price. And I'm sure it was a big price. You know, we don't know the number. I don't know the numbers, but.
And this came out during discovery.
That's part of what came out, and that's, of course, why the jury got upset and decided to really hit them hard with
$2 billion is
punitive
sending,
damages.
sending a very big
$2
message.
billion is incredible,
That's a real
And it really
message.
gives me hope that glyphosate may eventually be banned worldwide, which is where we need to be. We need to be banning it worldwide right now. We should have done it 20, 40 years ago. You know, it's amazing to me this chemical has been on the market for 40 years, since 1974. And it has been causing massive destruction of humans as well as all the species on Earth.
The environment.
Both the plants and the animals are affected very badly by this chemical.
But we have to look
and yet we're not seeing it. I mean, it's incredible to me that people haven't noticed that this is happening.
Well, because the large industries are keeping this under wraps, so
Yeah,
that
and
no one
because there's
does
so
know.
many other chemicals, you can always blame
Right,
something else.
exactly.
You know, we know all these diseases are going up dramatically. Autism is a very good example. It's
Right.
terrifying, the numbers on autism. If you project into the future, it's absolutely terrifying.
Now, you prepared some slides for us today. You want to tell us a little bit about those?
Yes, well, that'll take a little bit of backdrop, and this is my big passion right now, is glyphosate's mechanism of toxicity, and I'm almost certain at this point that I'm right about how it can be so toxic and how it can cause so many diseases. That's one thing people say, well, how could one chemical cause so many diseases? That can't be possible. The reason is because it has a really exotic mechanism of toxicity that involves it's a glycine molecule. Glycine is an amino acid. It's the smallest amino acid, and it's a very important amino acid in all the proteins. That's the famous DNA code that orchestrates the pattern of beads on a string that create all these proteins that do all kinds of things. You know, they're enzymes and transporters, and they just have all kinds of functions in your body to orchestrate metabolism and whatnot. And so the glycine is one of the amino acids in the proteins. Glyphosate is a glycine molecule, but it has an extra thing stuck onto its nitrogen atom called a methylphosphonyl group. So it's a glycine molecule with some extra stuff. And that extra stuff is really, really important because it changes the behavior of the molecule a lot. So if you were to take glycine out where it's supposed to be in the protein and put glyphosate in its place, you change the character of that protein in big ways. And for certain proteins, for certain glycine residues, they're dead in the water, like they don't work anymore if they have that kind of a change.
And what does that do?
I mean, it'll basically destroy their ability to do their job. So an enzyme, for example, that causes some kind of reaction to take place, you can't make that reaction work anymore if it has glyphosate instead of glycine.
This is a chemical reaction in the body.
The protein changes its shape, and it changes its, like it no longer can fit its substrate. It has different disabilities that occur because of these substitutions of glycine by glyphosate at certain spots. And so it's fun because there's this huge literature on proteins and their structure and their and the particular sequences that they have and where the active site is and all this stuff. There's huge literature on that. And you can find individual proteins that have individual glycines that are absolutely essential. And they do experiments where they take the glycine out, they put alanine in its place. Alanine is a very small change, much less change than glyphosate, where it has an extra methyl
What
group.
does that do?
It can ruin the protein in certain cases. So it all depends upon that particular protein, that particular glycine, how important it is to that protein. Some of the glycines, they don't really care. Other glycines are super, super important because they happen to be at the active site. They happen to be very important for making everything work the way it's supposed to
So
work.
does this all interfere with the microbiota in the human body?
Well, yeah, the microbiota get affected the same way because their proteins get substituted and then they don't work and then they get sick. And you do get, and there's been studies that have shown that glyphosate preferentially kills the beneficial bacteria. Bifidobacteria in particular get really hit hard. And there's also been shown that bifidobacteria are deficient in association with many different conditions such as autism.
So people with basically gut problems, metabolism problems, fatty liver problems, they all have this problem with this glycine molecule being substituted
That's what I
for
think.
the glyphosate?
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes, I think it's incredible. I'm absolutely fascinated by the biology of it, and I'm terrified by the consequences that can be predicted if I'm right. Now, there's a lot of pushback. Monsanto, of course, and Bayer want people to believe that this is not possible. So they're saying I'm basically misinformed. This can't work. This doesn't happen. This is what they're saying. It's not possible. And many people are accepting that. Okay, it's not possible. We don't even need you to look. I'm trying very hard to get a chemist interested because I think a chemist could absolutely nail it. And Monsanto's own research has shown dramatic evidence that it's happening. Their own research.
Through discovery.
Yeah, that's right. And Anthony Samso has been collaborating with me, and we've published several papers together. And he obtained a huge pile of stuff that was unpublished documents from Monsanto's research back when they were looking at glyphosate to see if it was toxic. And they have a specific report that's very interesting to me, which was done on bluegill sunfish. And they exposed them to radio-labeled glyphosate so they could trace the radio label. And they found radiolabel in their tissues, which meant the glyphosate was accumulating in the tissues, which is very bad, because they claim it just goes straight in and out and doesn't accumulate, but they know it accumulates.
So it bioaccumulated.
It bioaccumulated in the tissues. And then they said, well, okay, there's the radiolabel. Let's see how much glyphosate there is. They measured for glyphosate, only got 20%. So 80% of the radiolabel was unaccounted for. So then they said, well, maybe we can add some enzymes that will break down the proteins into individual amino acids and try again. They did that, and they got the yield up to 80%. So, or 70%, I think it was. So they got an extra 50% of the glyphosate accounted for after they broke the proteins down into individual amino acids. That's important because you don't see the glyphosate unless it's by itself. So when it's hooked inside these proteins, you don't see it.
I see.
And this is also an issue, for example, with breast milk. Zen Honeycutt tested breast milk for glyphosate, and she found it, I think, in 30% of the people that she tested. And one was at 1,600 times higher than the level allowed in water in Europe. And so she found it in breast milk, and then so that quickly some researchers published a paper that said, oh, there's no glyphosate in cow's milk. Well, the first thing they did was they precipitated out the proteins, and then they tested the rest of it. So the proteins is where the glyphosate was. They missed it. Whereas Zen used an ELISA protocol, which digests
Mothers
the proteins.
across America, yeah.
She had protein there, and she applied enzymes that broke it down into individual amino acids. So she saw the glyphosate.
I see.
They didn't. They said, okay, there's no glyphosate, but they were lying.
So where is that? What is that government doing about it?
Our government is doing nothing. They're like perfectly fine with glyphosate. It's a great product. It's killing all the weeds, making our food safe.
Sounds like the tobacco industry all over again.
It totally is. It's much worse than tobacco because it's affecting all of us.
Everyone, not just
and
smokers.
We can't avoid it. We can't just stop smoking to get rid of it. You know, we're stuck with it.
Right. So, you know, what do you see? Where do you see this going? I mean, other countries, I know, in Europe, they're a little more cautious about the spraying of glyphosate. They've actually said, you know, we don't want it on certain green areas. I think France is one of the countries that put some limitations on it.
There's now 17 countries, apparently, that have put restrictions on glyphosate of various sorts, some including banning it, period, you know.
Now, was glyphosate used prior to the advent of GMOs, or was it?
Yes, it was first introduced on the market in 1974. And it was used, but you had to be careful because you'd kill the plant. You know, it kills all plants, so you had to be careful. But then in the late 1990s, they came up with this great concept of putting in these GMO genes, which were actually, so there's this one enzyme, EPSP synthase, that glyphosate famously disrupts in the plants. And the argument is we don't have that enzyme in our cells, and therefore we're completely safe. I mean, it's a nice argument, but it's unfortunately very flawed. And so, but then they put in this version of EPSP synthase, which, by the way, has that glycine residue that's at the active site is displaced by alanine in this protected version. So that's where they're substituting glycine for alanine in order to not be able to let glyphosate substitute for glycine. That's how it works.
Right. But for the ordinary person, when they're buying a GMO product, they're getting even more of this.
Yes, the GMO, it's been shown in experiments on soybeans that the GMO soy plant takes up the glyphosate much more so than the non-GMO soy plant, because the non-GMO plant gets killed by it and it can't take it up, whereas the GMO plant is still living. It goes ahead and it actually takes it up along amino acid transport channels because it is an amino acid. The biology doesn't realize this is a super toxic amino acid. Don't take it up. It just goes ahead and takes it up anyway. So it gets in high concentrations. They found huge levels of glyphosate in GMO soy.
What about non-GMO soy? Have they tested that?
Well, I have a paper that on file where they looked at non-GMO, organic, and GMO, and they found very low levels in the non-GMO soy in that particular paper, and they found huge levels in the GMO soy. Very, very big difference between the non-GMO and the GMO soy.
It could be from the water, probably.
Well, probably because it's sprayed all over the plant. You know, in the case of the GMO soy, you don't have to worry about not getting the glyphosate on the plant. Whereas with the non-GMO soil, you'll kill the plant if you get glyphosate on it.
But what about desiccation? They use that. I've read that they use the glyphosate to dry the plant for a harvest, to expedite harvest.
Absolutely.
And this is on regular plants.
Non-GMO. This is where non-GMO is not safe. In fact, in many cases, non-GMO has higher levels of glyphosate than GMO. The highest levels have been found in non-GMO crops, fruits derived from non-GMO crops, the legumes like chickpeas and garbanzo beans, that's like hummus, very, very high levels.
Because of the desiccation.
Yeah, it's sprayed right before harvest, and then the glyphosate gets soaked up into the plant and goes right into the seed. And the same thing with oats, so, like oatmeal and Cheerios and oat bars, lots of glyphosate. And then wheat is sprayed right before harvest. I think that's why we have an epidemic in celiac disease.
And everybody's gluten intolerant.
Absolutely, and it's because there's glyphosate embedded in the gluten is what I believe, which makes the gluten very difficult to break down. There's also glyphosate contamination in your digestive proteins, which makes them not work, so you can't break down proteins, which is why we have, like, when you go now to the health food store, you see all these piles of different amino acids that you can take as supplements. You have to eat amino acids already, basically proteins already digested,
Right.
because your digestive system can't break them down, and that's because your digestive enzymes are being busted by glyphosate.
That's incredible.
I think so.
So because we can't break this down, American people, well, I guess people all over the world, but especially in this country where nothing is being done, people have to take it into their own hands to, regulate the diet. But what I see is a major problem. Americans eat out all the time.
Yes.
What are you going to do if you go in a restaurant?
I know.
You're going to say how much glyphosate
We
is in my
need to
food.
get the restaurants on board. We need to have people realize I need to open an organic restaurant. People need to start doing that, or to offer organic choice on the menu.
And we also need to get our legislators on board. But I don't know how that's going to happen.
I don't either.
In this...
I've given up on the legislators. I really think it has to be grassroots, bottom up. Once mothers realize that if I feed my children organic, they're going to be so much healthier, then they'll be compelled to do it. And then we will push the market. The farmers will, and of course, if the farmers realize it's causing non-Hodgkins lymphoma, they may be more reluctant to use it, I would think, right?
Well, I would think so. With these jury verdicts, it's incredible. People just casual gardeners. And one of the things I also read about was I thought was quite interesting. They say that the large-scale farming operations, they use a lot of protective gear. And
yes,
so
I read
they're
that
not
too.
as exposed to the application of glyphosate.
That's right. And this is why you don't get as much evidence when you look at the people who apply the glyphosate versus the other people working on the farm. It's hard to see a signal there because the other people they're not protected the way the applicators are.
But there's also another case of some other field workers who do a lot of hand work, and they're getting very ill.
Yeah, because they're not protected. They often don't have all that protective gear, so they're actually, in a sense, more vulnerable to the exposure than the ones who are wearing the gear as they're applying it.
So, just to recap a little bit, you have a mesylphospho group that fills a spot.
Yeah, let me talk about this because this is first of all an enzyme which is called PEP carboxykinase. PEP carboxykinase, a very, very interesting enzyme that I only discovered recently, and I've been studying glyphosate for a long time. And I was like, as soon as I saw this enzyme, I said, aha, this has got to be important because it has, it's the exact model of the same thing as the EPSP synthase, which is the enzyme that gets disrupted in the plants. The one in the shikimate pathway has this same property of binding PEP. So this one, PEP, this is the substrate that is in EPSP synthase and is also here, and there's and the enzyme has these amino acids that form a cavity where the PEP can go, and then the enzyme is designed to have these positively charged amino acids that are going to attract the negative charge of the phosphate of the PEP to hold it in place. So there's this intricate design that supports getting the PEP to go in there and stay put. That is a structural aspect of the protein for both EPSP synthase in the shikimate pathway, the one that glyphosate famously disrupts, and this protein.
And
this protein has the same design.
And the shikimate pathway, for those people that are listening, just a brief...
yeah, that's the pathway in the plants that is disrupted by glyphosate. And that, too, is a whole other story because that's super important. It produces aromatic amino acids, which are essential. Those are precursors to the neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters, we need that to help keep our brain
brains working, yeah. Dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, and also the skin tanning agent melanin, they all come out of that shikimate pathway. I know, absolutely. The serotonin deficiency is a whole other story. But this thing is interesting because when you have glyphosate substituting for glycine. So This is the original one with the PEP in the place. And then you can instead, you can put, this is a glycine over here, you can change it to glyphosate. Because when the protein is assembled, it puts glyphosate in there. The glyphosate sticks out into the place where the PEP is supposed to go. It has a methylphosphonyl group, so the phosphonate looks a whole lot like phosphate, and it also gets anchored in by those same positive charges of the surrounding amino acids. So the whole thing works out beautifully to draw glyphosate in, to go into the protein, occupy the space where PEP should go, such that a PEP can't fit. And that ruins the protein's ability to do its job.
Is this why people have methylation problems?
Well, this specific one is not, but there's other proteins that are affected that cause that.
Wow.
But this one is amazing because it causes the fatty liver disease very, very nicely. I've looked at this protein.
Amazing.
Super important protein in the body. It can cause, if it's broken, you can get fatty liver disease. You can get high serum oxalate, which causes kidney stones. You can get fungus infection because the fungus feeds on the substrate that gets blocked. And you can get type 1 diabetes. All of those can be caused by a defective version of this protein.
And we know there's an epidemic of all of these.
All of those are going up dramatically in step with glyphosate usage. So it's a beautiful, beautiful fit. And it's a protein that has the same structure as the protein that it famously disrupts. So this is why I think you can just by analogy say it's going to disrupt this one too.
It may be a beautiful fit, but it's a devastating story.
It's totally devastating. And fungus infection is also something that not only humans, we have a huge problem with fungus infection, and we have a problem with fungus on our plants, and also fungus on the wild animals.
And our bats are dying because of fungus.
Absolutely. Fungus is causing all kinds of trouble, and that can be caused by glyphosate disrupting this enzyme.
I just don't know where we go from here.
I know. I think we have to move to another planet. This planet is becoming so toxic that it can't afford life.
All I can say is the folks that are listening, advocate, start a grassroots effort, and let's make our EPA accountable, our legislators accountable, everyone accountable, because otherwise we're sacrificing our lives.
That's true. And eat organic, buy organic. That will help to push us in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Seneff.
Thank you.
I want to thank our guest, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, for sharing her research and opinions on the harmful effects of glyphosate on humans and the environment. I also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guest, visit The Legal Edition online at thelegaledition.com. As always, this information is for general educational purposes only. It is not to be construed or relied upon as legal, business, or professional advice, and please consult a qualified practitioner as to your legal, business, or professional needs. And don't forget, subscribe online, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter.